Okay, so to create an ATC Taxi Network, you need WorldEditor, and you need WorldEditor. It's currently in beta. It's 1.2. So to get that, if you don't have 1.2 already, you can go to developer.x-plane.com. You can see the URL up there. This is a developer portal. And now if you click on Scenery Tools and WorldEditor, so here's the stable versions 1.1. So you need to scroll down here to latest beta. So you need 1.2, and you can get them for any of your platforms. Okay, so here we are in WorldEditor 1.2 beta 1. As you can see, I have Seattle, which is our default airport. I have that opened up. Before we begin, I just want to point out that I really encourage you to create groups for each of the types of things you've built your airport with. So for instance, we have our runways here in a group, so we can hide and show the runways. The taxiways and all the pavement here are in a group, so we can hide and show that. Even the shoulders are done separately here. The groups are really important because you're going to want to hide and show things as you're putting down the taxi network, because it gets very cluttered with a lot of the things turned on, but yet you do need them for reference sometimes. For instance, the taxi lines, we're going to want to turn these on and off so we can draw our taxi networks, reference them as we're drawing the taxi network. The other important thing is it's important to have everything locked that you could possibly click on, because as you're setting down your taxi network, you're going to be doing a lot of clicking, and if you're clicking and moving the runway by accident, or you're moving some lines out of the way by accident, it's going to get pretty frustrating. So I tend to lock everything I can that's not going to be used. So I think it's going to be easier to go over a fully completed ATC taxi network first, and I can show you the some of the thoughts and decisions that went into making the layout the way it is, because that's really the hard part of creating a taxi network. The actual, building it, creating the pieces is very simple. It's just laying down a bunch of lines. So here we have a view of Seattle with all the pavement and runways showing. This is not at all what the ATC system sees. The ATC system only knows of your network. So I'm going to hide everything here. I'm going to hide the runways, and I'm going to hide the taxiways and tarmac. And the only thing we have left right now, you can see, is the taxi routing. This is the only thing the ATC system knows about. So the rule is to do any taxiing, the ATC system requires you to be on one of these edges. So every one of these pieces, we're going to call an ATC taxi edge or segment. I may use the terms interchangeably, but the edges are all that matters here. These line segments. So let's say you were out over in this area at a terminal and you requested a taxi to runway 34 right, which is this runway down here. You're off the network here. You're not on any segment. This is only legal under the very beginning. So in the very beginning, you can be off the network, and it's going to quickly get you onto the network as quick as it can, and then every turn you're given from that point on has to be at some intersection here, and you have to stay on the segment. So this is not that different than your car GPS, where you can be in a parking lot somewhere that's off the GPS's routing, and you request a direction somewhere, and it'll say, please drive to highlighted route. So what it's doing is it's figuring out how to get you quickly onto the nearest road, and then from there it can tell you definitively how to get there. So the same is true here, which means that if there's a building between you and the taxiway it wants to get you on, it's going to direct you through the building, because the ATC system has no knowledge of any objects that are placed down. It may also ask you to taxi across the grass too, if it doesn't know that there's no pavement there. So it's really important as an airport author to make sure there are edges nearby any place that a user would be requesting a taxi from. Perhaps the Seattle layout should be updated, because if we turn on the tarmac, you can see the terminals are up in these regions here, and often there's terminal buildings between the runways and taxiways and the actual terminals. So that's why you're perhaps seeing aircraft driving through buildings and things like that. So that's something that can be easily fixed by bringing some of these edges over into the taxiways. I'm sorry, into the terminal area. So the first thing I want to point out down in this area here, we have the properties for your selection. So we have nothing selected right now. I'm going to pick just this one taxi edge right here, which is Taxiway Bravo. So you can see we have some properties here. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you there's, I think there's 5 different properties here that you should ignore for ATC segments, for these ATC edges. In the next version of WorldEditor, I think we're going to hide these, but for now you should ignore them. These are the control latitude, longitude, high and low, and split. So these 5 right here, you should completely ignore. They don't apply to the ATC system. The rest of them should be somewhat familiar. The segment has a name. In this case, the name is B. That's because this is Taxiway Bravo. The ATC system is going to look at the name of any of these edges when it's giving taxi instructions, and it's going to say it phonetically. So I want it to say Bravo because this is Taxiway Bravo, so I put the letter B. I don't think case matters, but it's probably good practice just to use a capital B. Anyway, whether or not it's locked is the same for all things that you can put down in WorldEditor. We're going to leave it unlocked for now. It's not hidden. So the first thing that really matters is this one-way property. So you can see there's an X here, meaning this is not one-way. One-way has been disabled. So that means that if the aircraft is heading northbound and he's going to this intersection first, he can taxi northbound on it. If he's going southbound and he's coming to this intersection first, he can taxi southbound on it. So it's a two-way segment. He can go in either direction. If we only wanted to make sure that aircraft never go southbound on this, they always go northbound, then we can check this one-way flag here, and you can see it turns into a little arrow. I don't know if we can zoom in on that and make it a little clearer. So you can see the arrow points up, making that north. Now the reason it points up is because back when I created this, I put down this node first and this node second, so that forces the direction that way. Now I have to caution you about one-way segments. One-way segments should be used very, very sparingly. I really want you to think twice before making something one-way. And the reason is a lot of people are using the one-way property to try to mimic the flow of real-world airports. And this should not be used to mimic the flow. Like maybe in the real world, aircraft tend to taxi northbound on Taxiway Bravo. But unless it's always true and never varies under any circumstances, you should not set the one-way flag. Now, there are going to be taxiways at airports that definitely are one-way. They're strictly enforced, just like, one-way streets. And if that's the case, that's why we have the property. But really think twice before using it. If it's not an absolute certainty that it's a one-way taxiway, don't use it to mimic flow. The next property is runway. So this segment here, if we turn on the pavement again, you can see this segment here is a taxiway. It's not anything other than a taxiway. So if I select the segment again, you can see that runway says none because it's not a runway, it's a taxiway. Now, this segment here is on runway 34 right. And you can see for the runway, I've chosen 16 left, 34 right. So if you click on this, you're going to get a little menu. And the menu already knows, it's already populated based on the runways at the airport you're currently editing. So this way you can just pick which runway it is and tell the ATC system, this is a runway and it's going to be called runway 16 left, 34 right. Now, I don't want to do that. You'll also notice the name here is also 16 left, 34 right. So once again, the names are very important for the ATC system because it's going to need to know what to call this when it needs to tell you to do something in relation to this. There is one thing to note, which is for runways, it doesn't matter what you type here for the name. X-Plane is going to ignore whatever you've typed and is going to put in the actual runway name in this format for you. It's going to do it automatically. Actually, I think it's not X-Plane that does it, but I think when you export from WorldEditor, it's going to ignore whatever you've typed for name. This only applies to runways. And the reason is runways require a certain format. The runways need to be listed in the order of the low end of the runway to the high end of the runway with a slash. And rather than make things confusing, since we definitively know it's a runway and we know what runways are at the airport, we decided to automatically populate the name for you. Now, we don't know taxi names. We just don't have that data in X-Plane. So that's why it's definitely important for taxis that you name them appropriately. So that's what the runway property is. So you're going to notice we have various different colors here. We have some red segments. We have some green segments. We also have some yellow segments down here, down in these areas here. So let me just go over the colors in WorldEditor first. So green segments are regular taxi segments. There's nothing special about them. Red segments, red does not mean runway. Red means there's something special about that segment that makes it protected. So a red segment is a segment that ATC is going to have to make a decision before letting you drive on it. So these segments here are red because they're on the runway side of a hold short, meaning you can't drive on this segment here unless ATC has cleared you. So these are protected zones. All the red are protected zones. So obviously the runways are always going to be red. All the runway segments are going to be red. And these segments leading up to the runways, you're probably going to make red as well by setting some hold short data, which we'll get to in a moment. So if we zoom out here, you can see these here. These are all the runways, and all these segments leading up to are hold shorts. Now the yellow is a different type of hold short. The yellow is a hold short for ILS purposes. So some airports have ILS approaches, and there's glide slope transmitters near the runway, and they found that having a bunch of aluminum parked in front of the transmitter tends to degrade the quality of the transmission. So when certain ILS approaches are in effect, they want aircraft to hold in certain positions on the runway so that you don't block the antennas. It's not to prevent runway incursion like these red sections are. This is just to block the ILS, so you don't block the ILS transmitters. So that's what the yellow sections are. So anything over here, these are ILS holds. There's a couple up here. Not all airports will have them, but again, it's a feature that we've allowed. So if we go back to this segment here, segment Bravo, you can see it's not a runway, and it's also not a hold short. These last three sections, departures, arrivals, and ILS precision area, these apply to segments that are special, that aircraft need to hold short of them at some time or another. So let's take a look at something that is a hold short. Let's click on this one. So you can see, again, it's not a runway. And the last field is the one we're focused on here, ILS precision area. So this is saying, if you set something in this menu, you're saying that this segment needs to be considered an ILS precision area. You need to think twice before letting aircraft go past here. And you're picking the runway that applies, or the runway that's affected, I should say. The runway that's affected, in this case, 3-4 right. So what this tells the ATC system is that if the ILS is active for runway 3-4 right, then this segment here becomes important. And ATC should make sure aircraft hold short of this segment and don't go beyond it until it's safe to use the runway. It's safe, whatever arrival is coming in isn't going to be affected by the aircraft being there. So again, when you click on these, all the runways at the airport will be populated here for you to pick, and you can pick multiples. I think these sections up here might have multiple runways. No, I guess not. Okay, so let's move on to a red segment. So let's just pick one here. So this is taxiway November. It's not a runway. But notice departures and arrivals is filled in now. So what departures and arrivals means is that this aircraft needs to hold short if there is a departure or arrival taking place. Actually, let me start that over. This aircraft would need to hold short if runway 16 left or 34 right are being used for departures or arrivals. So most of the time you will set the runways for both departures and arrivals, because whether somebody's departing on that runway or arriving on that runway, you don't care. ATC doesn't care. It just needs to know that you can't be anywhere near that runway because something is going on. Now, there are times where you would set only departures or arrivals. Take, for instance, some airports have a taxiway behind the main runway, down over here where this mouse cursor is. Now, to have a giant tail sticking up on the approach path of an arriving aircraft, that's a problem. So in this case, you wouldn't want any aircraft in that area if they're arriving. But if somebody's departing up the runway over here, you being behind the runway really doesn't affect it too much. So that's a case where you would set the arrivals 16 left, 34 right. Actually, just 34 right. But you wouldn't care about departures because you wouldn't need to hold aircraft short of that section for departures, only for arrivals. So I guess to summarize, these sections tell ATC what operations it needs to consider when deciding whether this segment is going to be a segment that an aircraft needs to hold short of. So 99% of the time, you're going to set departures and arrivals at the same time. They're going to be perfect mirror images of one another. And you could see that whether 16 left is active or 34 right is active, it doesn't matter what direction the traffic's flowing. We need to protect this zone. So all of these red segments over here are going to have the same 16 left, 34 right property set.